My son forgot to hang up, and I heard him say, "She's a burden." While he vacationed in Europe, I sold the $875,000 home, emptied every room, and left one note on the counter. His key didn't fit when he got back. The key would not turn. I watched from across the street, sitting inside a rented moving truck with the engine off and both hands pressed flat against my thighs to keep them from shaking. My son Daniel stood on the front porch of the house I had owned for 32 years, twisting a silver key into a lock that no longer recognized him. His wife Melissa stood beside him in oversized sunglasses and a linen dress she had probably bought somewhere in Milan, holding 3 shopping bags and laughing the way people laugh when they still believe they are in control of their lives. Then the laugh stopped. Daniel pulled the key out, stared at it, tried again. The lock did not move. He pressed his shoulder against the door. Nothing. And from where I sat, 60 feet away with the windows cracked and my heart hammering so hard I could hear blood in my ears, one cold thought beat through me like a second pulse. Good. My name is Carol Mitchell. I was 68 years old the summer I disappeared from my own life, sold my $875,000 home without telling a soul in my family, transferred every dollar I had into accounts only I could touch, and left nothing behind but an empty house and a note on a bare kitchen counter. People think revenge is supposed to be loud. Screaming matches, broken dishes, police cars in the driveway. Mine was none of that. Mine wore reading glasses and soft-soled shoes. Mine signed documents with a steady hand and smiled at the moving crew while something inside my chest broke apart so quietly that no one heard it. The day I vanished, not one person in my family knew what I had done. Not Daniel, not Melissa, not even my younger sister Helen, who talked too much when she got nervous and would have crumbled under the weight of a secret this size. I need you to understand something before I go any further. I had spent most of my adult life being the woman who kept peace at any cost. I swallowed arguments the way other people swallow aspirin, quickly and without complaint. I told myself that silence was a form of kindness, that patience was the same thing as strength, but silence can do something terrible if you let it go on long enough. It can make cruel people brave. It can teach them that they may keep taking and taking while you keep giving. I did not understand that until one careless phone call on a Tuesday afternoon cracked open the life I thought I knew and showed me what was rotting underneath. 3 weeks before I watched Daniel fail at the lock, everything was still normal, or at least it looked normal. I lived alone in a 2-story colonial in Cedar Grove, a quiet suburb where people waved from porches and mowed their lawns on Saturday mornings whether the grass needed it or not. My late husband Frank and I had bought that house in 1991 when Daniel was just 10, and the world felt like something you could hold with both hands. We raised our son in those rooms. We measured his height on the laundry room wall with a pencil and watched the marks climb year after year. We celebrated birthdays in the dining room. We cried together in the kitchen the afternoon Frank's oncologist called with the diagnosis, and again, 3 years later, the morning we buried him. After Frank died, the house felt too large, but it also felt sacred. It held the shape of everything I had ever loved. Daniel was 42 by then. He worked in corporate finance, which mostly meant he talked about numbers, projections, and opportunities in a confident voice that made other people nod along even when they did not fully understand what he was saying. Melissa, his wife of 15 years, cared about image the way some people care about oxygen. She was never rude in public. She was much too polished for that. She had mastered the art of saying something sharp while smiling so warmly that you did not feel the cut until she had already left the room. She could make selfishness sound practical. She could make greed sound like concern. After Frank passed, they acted caring at first. Daniel came by with groceries. Melissa brought soup from a little French place downtown and said I should not be alone too much. They started stopping by every weekend, then 2 or 3 times a week. Everyone told me how lucky I was. Your son is devoted. Your daughter-in-law is so thoughtful. I wanted to believe it. I wanted it so badly that I ignored the small things that pinched at me like pebbles inside a shoe. Melissa would stand in my kitchen, running her hand along the granite countertop and say, "This house is just so much for one person, Carol." Daniel would sit at my dining table with his laptop open and say, "Property taxes are only going up, Mom. Have you looked at the numbers?" They started talking about the future in a way that made my skin feel tight. They said I should think ahead. Daniel offered to handle my bills. Melissa offered to help me declutter. She called it a fresh start, but when she touched Frank's old watch box, or flipped through the photo albums, or ran her fingers across the handmade quilt my mother had sewn before she died, her eyes did not look soft. They looked like someone appraising items at an estate sale. One Sunday afternoon, Daniel sat across from me with his laptop open and a spreadsheet on the screen I was not meant to see clearly. "Mom," he said, using that slow, careful voice people adopt when they think they are being gentle with someone fragile, "have you thought about putting the house in a trust?" I stirred my tea. "Why would I do that?" "For protection," he said. Melissa nodded fast, like a woman who had rehearsed this moment. "For simplicity." I looked from one face to the other. "Protection for whom?" Daniel laughed a little too quickly. "For you, of course." But something shifted inside me. I may have been 68, but I was not a fool. I had spent 30 years helping Frank manage our household finances. I knew what a person sounded like when they were explaining something, and I knew what a person sounded like when they were steering you toward a decision they had already made for you. I told Daniel I would think about it. He did not like that answer. His jaw tightened for just a second before he smiled and said, "Sure, Mom, no rush." After that visit, the texture of everything changed. The sweetness stayed on the surface, thin as paint, but underneath Beneath it, I could feel pressure building. Melissa started texting me listings for senior living communities with names like Willowbrook Gardens and Sunrise Meadows, places with pretty courtyards and smiling elderly couples holding hands on brochures. Daniel started mentioning stairs, how dangerous they could become as I got older, how a smaller place would free up cash, how it would make life easier for everyone, for everyone. That phrase circled inside me like a bird that would not land. Then they told me about Europe, their 15th wedding anniversary trip, 10 days in Italy and France. Melissa showed me the itinerary on her phone, swiping through photos of boutique hotels in Florence, rooftop restaurants in Paris, first-class train tickets between cities. Daniel smiled and said they had worked hard and deserved something special. That part was true. People deserve joy. I did not begrudge them a vacation. What I could not swallow was what Daniel said on his way out the door. Mom, maybe while we're away, you can think seriously about next steps. When we get back, we should sit down and make some real decisions. Melissa touched my arm and added in her sweetest voice, you need people who can manage things before life gets messy. Life gets messy. I smiled, because that is what I had trained myself to do my entire life. I smiled while something behind my ribs went cold and hard. The day before their flight, I was upstairs folding laundry when my phone buzzed on the nightstand, Daniel's name on the screen. I did not reach it in time. A few minutes later, I saw he had left a voicemail. I pressed play while matching socks, expecting something ordinary. Maybe a reminder to water the plants on his porch. Maybe a last-minute request. At first, all I heard was background noise, a car door shutting, wind. Then Melissa laughed. Not her polished public laugh, but her real one, the one with edges. Daniel's voice came through clearly. I know, but once we get back, I'll push harder. She's not going to need that whole house much longer anyway. Melissa said something I could not fully make out. Then Daniel answered, lower this time, but still clear enough for the recording to catch every syllable. She's a burden, Mel. She doesn't see it, but she is. We've put our lives on hold long enough. My knees buckled. I sat down on the edge of the bed so fast that the laundry basket tipped and a white towel landed at my feet. I remember staring at it like my brain had left the room and forgotten to take me with it. Burden. My son. My only child. The boy I had carried inside my body, nursed through fevers, driven to baseball practice in a Honda Civic with no air conditioning, worked double shifts at the Cedar Grove Public Library to help put through college after Frank lost his job and took a new one for $14,000 less a year. That boy, now a man in a tailored coat, had just called me a burden. Not in anger, not during a fight. Calmly, casually, the way you might describe a piece of furniture that was taking up too much space. Then Melissa said the part that burned like acid poured slowly over an open wound. When the house is finally handled, everything gets easier. Exactly, Daniel said. The message ended. I did not move for a long time. The room around me felt wrong, tilted, like it belonged to someone else's life. I looked at the framed photo on my dresser of Daniel at age 8, holding a fishing rod beside his father, both of them grinning under wide summer light. I remembered his first broken arm, his first day of college, the night he called me crying from his first apartment because a girl had shattered his heart and he did not know how to make it stop hurting. I remembered every sacrifice so clearly that my chest ached, and now I had heard the truth in his own voice. I was not his mother in that voicemail. I was an obstacle standing between him and my house. I wish I could tell you I became brave in that moment. I did not. First, I cried. Hard, messy, ugly crying that soaked the pillow and made my throat raw. I cried from grief, not anger. Anger came later, slow and quiet, like a tide. Grief came first, because when a stranger hurts you, it stings. When your own child talks about you the way you might talk about a stain on the carpet, something deeper breaks, something that does not have a name. That evening, I almost called him. I almost screamed every word I was choking on. But another voice inside me, older and steadier, said one thing, wait. So I waited. That night, I did not sleep. I walked through my house in the dark, touching the banister, the dining table, the curtains Frank had picked out because he said the blue matched my eyes, the old upright piano nobody played anymore. I stood in Daniel's childhood bedroom and watched moonlight fall across the floor where he used to build towers out of wooden blocks. I kept hearing the word over and over, burden, burden, burden. By morning, my tears were gone. Something harder had taken their place. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table. I listened to the voicemail 3 more times, not to hurt myself, but because I needed to be certain I had heard correctly. I had. Every casual, careless word was real. Then I opened the filing cabinet where Frank kept our important papers, house deed, bank records, insurance policies, account numbers, and I pulled out everything. My hands were completely steady. For the first time in more years than I could count, I did not ask myself what would keep the peace. I asked what was fair. At 10 high that morning, I called Janet Ruiz, a real estate agent with 22 years of experience in Cedar Grove. Janet had helped my friend Ruth sell her townhouse the year before, and Ruth said she was fast, discreet, and did not ask unnecessary questions. Janet arrived at noon in a navy blazer with a leather portfolio and kind eyes. She thought she was coming to give me general information. She left 2 hours later knowing she was handling a private, off-market sale that needed to close before my son returned from Europe. You're sure? She asked gently, standing in my living room. I looked around the house one long, slow time. Yes, I said. There was sadness in that word, but there was also something that felt like the first clean breath I had taken in months. After Janet left, I called my bank and spoke with a manager named Patricia Cole, who had handled Frank's accounts for years. Then I called Arthur Bell, a property and estate attorney whose firm had managed Frank's will. Arthur was 61, careful, principled, and had known our family for 2 decades. Then I called a moving company and asked one strange question. How quickly can you empty a full house if time really matters? The man on the phone laughed. Faster than you think, ma'am. That evening, Daniel called from the airport. His voice was bright. Just wanted to say we're boarding. Love you, Mom. For one terrible second, a weak part of me wanted to say it. I heard your voicemail. Explain yourself. Tell me there is some horrible misunderstanding. Instead, I said, have a wonderful trip, sweetheart. I hung up and looked around my house. The game had already begun. And less than 48 hours later, while my son and his wife were eating handmade pasta under Italian lights and clinking glasses of wine that cost more than my weekly groceries, I found something hidden in Daniel's old file box in my study that turned this from a heartbreak into something far more dangerous. It was not just about greed. It was not just about my house. And when I read what was in that box with my own eyes, I realized my son had been planning something far worse than pushing me to downsize. He had already started. The papers shook in my hands so hard they made a dry, rattling sound against each other. I stood alone in my study under the overhead light, staring at a set of printed emails and one signed draft agreement that should never have existed. My pulse hammered in my neck. Daniel had met with a property consultant named Greg Hollister 6 weeks earlier. He had asked questions about fast-track transfer options, temporary power of attorney procedures, and how to relocate an elderly parent out of a home for her own safety if there were concerns about cognitive decline. Cognitive decline. I sat down in Frank's old desk chair and read every line again, slowly, the way you read something you are hoping will change if you just look at it long enough. One email, sent from Daniel's personal account, described his mother as struggling to manage a large home alone and possibly showing early signs of confusion. He asked how quickly a property transition could happen once legal authority was established. Another email from the consultant mentioned that once a family member held medical or financial power, action could be taken in the parent's best interest before conditions worsened. Clipped to the stack with a yellow sticky note was a line in Melissa's neat handwriting. Push the safety angle. Mention the stairs. Mention forgetfulness. Make it sound urgent. For a long time, I could not breathe properly. I was not confused. I was not declining. I drove myself to church every Sunday, to the bank every Friday, to the grocery store twice a week, and to lunch with friends whenever I felt like it. I paid my own bills. I remembered every birthday in the family and half the birthdays of my neighbor's children. But my son and his wife had been quietly constructing a false narrative around me, a story that could transform me from a capable woman into a problem to be managed, controlled, and eventually set aside. I felt afraid then, truly physically afraid. Not because my feelings were hurt, because I understood how far they were willing to go. They did not just want my house, they wanted control. The next morning, I drove to Arthur Bell's office with the file box on the passenger seat beside me. Arthur read the papers without interrupting. When I finished explaining everything, the voicemail, the pressure campaign, the trust conversation, the Europe trip, and the documents I had found, he took off his glasses, set them on his desk, and folded his hands. Carol, he said quietly, this is serious. I asked the only question that mattered. Could they have done it? Could they have actually taken control? He was honest. If you had signed the wrong documents while trusting your son, or if someone believed the story they were constructing, they could have put you in a very weak position very quickly. Not permanently, but enough to cause real damage before anyone intervened. That answer sent ice through my veins. But you came here before any of that happened, Arthur continued. That matters. We can protect you. We can make your decisions clear, documented, and legally airtight. Then we do it, I said. All of it. That day, I updated every record I had. I moved accounts. I changed access on every system Daniel had ever helped me set up. I created new legal instructions stating in plain, unambiguous language that I was of sound mind, acting of my own free will, and that no family member held or was authorized to hold power of attorney over my affairs. Arthur advised me to store copies of the voicemail and the documents in multiple locations. He said if Daniel tried to challenge anything after the fact, a paper trail would be the difference between my word and his. I did not feel like a mother that day. I felt like a witness preparing for a trial. By the end of that week, Janet had a buyer, a retired couple from upstate who had sold their farm and wanted to be close to their grandchildren. They loved the house. The woman, whose name was Eleanor, cried in my sunroom because it reminded her of her own mother's kitchen. That helped me more than I expected. It made selling the house feel less like an amputation and more like handing something precious to people who would take care of it. I accepted $875,000. Clean, fast, no contingencies. Arthur approved the terms. The closing was set for the day after Daniel and Melissa's return flight. That timing was not an accident. If they had been home, they would have interfered. They would have begged, pressured, possibly threatened legal action. With them on another continent, they could do none of that. Then came the hardest part, packing 32 years of life into boxes. The movers arrived at 7 a.m. on a Wednesday. 4 men in work boots and gray t-shirts carrying blankets and packing tape. One of them, a young guy named Marcus, asked what should go to storage and what should come with me. The question made everything real in a way that signing papers had not. I had rented a small furnished cottage near a lake about 40 minutes outside town, a short-term lease arranged through a friend of Ruth's. The cottage was simple, clean, and private. Just enough space to disappear without being truly lost. lost. As the movers wrapped dishes and carried furniture out the front door, I walked from room to room making decisions I never imagined I would have to make. I held Frank's wool coat against my chest for so long that Marcus quietly turned away. I sat on the edge of my bed before they loaded it onto the truck and cried into my palms. I found one of Daniel's school essays in the back of a drawer, a 5th grade paper about what his mother meant to him, and had to lean against the wall until the shaking passed. But I kept going, because pain is not always a signal to stop. Sometimes it is the cost of finally doing what you should have done a long time ago. By the second day, the rooms echoed. The walls were bare. The kitchen cabinets stood open and empty. The house that had held my entire adult life now looked like a place no one had ever lived. Then came the note. I sat at the kitchen table one last time and wrote in slow, steady letters on a single sheet of paper, "Daniel, I heard the voicemail. I heard what you said about me. I found the papers. I know what you and Melissa were planning. I was never a burden. I was your mother. This house is sold. My money is safe. You will not control me, remove me, or speak for me again. Do not look for pity where you gave none. Do not call love a burden. Do not mistake silence for weakness. When you are ready to tell the truth, perhaps one day we will speak." Mom, I read it 3 times. I folded it into a plain white envelope and placed it on the bare kitchen counter where he could not miss it. Then I walked out the front door, locked it behind me, and drove away. The return flight landed at 11:20 a.m. on a Thursday. By noon, Daniel and Melissa would be driving home full of photos, souvenirs, and the comfortable assumption that everything they had left behind was exactly where they put it. By 1 their world split open. I did not go back to town. I could not trust myself to be that close. Instead, I waited at the cottage with my phone on the table and my hands wrapped around a mug of tea that went cold before I took a single sip. The phone rang at 12:47. Daniel. I stared at his name until it stopped. It rang again and again. By the 6th call, Melissa's name was flashing too. I let them ring. At 1:15, a text from Daniel. "Mom, where are you?" Another. "Why is the house empty?" Another. "What is this note?" Then a longer one. "Call me right now. This is not funny." I looked at the words and felt something I did not expect. Not joy, not satisfaction, relief. For once, confusion belonged to someone else. At 1:32, the cottage landline rang. Only 3 people had that number. Arthur, Janet, and Helen. It was Janet. "Carol," she said, her voice tight. "Are you safe?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because your son just came to my office. He demanded to see the sale file. He demanded the buyer's name. He was shouting. He told my receptionist the sale was invalid because you were not mentally competent to make decisions. I had security walk him out." My fingers went white around the phone. Exactly what he had been planning all along. Arthur called 20 minutes later. Daniel had already tried his office too, leaving a voicemail that Arthur described as aggressive and borderline threatening. Arthur told me not to respond to anything without him present and to document every contact attempt. Then Helen called, breathless and crying. Daniel had shown up at her house. "He looked wild," she whispered. "Melissa was in the car crying. She kept saying you had embarrassed them and ruined everything. Ruined everything. Not ruined our relationship, not broken our hearts. Ruined everything. Their plans, their access, their future built on money that was never theirs." I told Helen only this: "Do not tell them where I am. I am safe. That is all you need to know." Late that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a photo. Daniel standing in front of a storage facility across town, the exact one where most of my furniture and boxes had been taken. He had found it somehow. The text beneath the photo read, "You can run from me, but you cannot hide what is mine. Mine." Then a second message: "I know where your important boxes are now." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then I took a screenshot, sent it to Arthur, and turned the phone face down because my hands were shaking too badly to hold it. This was no longer just a family wound, it was a fight. Arthur called within minutes. He had already contacted the storage company to restrict access and was preparing formal legal notices. He also told me he was bringing in someone else, a woman named Dana Mercer, a former financial crimes investigator who now consulted on private fraud cases and asset protection. "Carol," he said, "I need you to hear this plainly. Your son is not just upset. He is acting like a man who has something to lose beyond your relationship." The next morning, Dana Mercer arrived at Arthur's office. She was in her early 50s, silver threaded through dark hair, with the kind of quiet intensity that made you want to tell the truth whether you meant to or not. She read the papers, listened to the voicemail, examined the loan documents Arthur had pulled, and asked precise surgical questions. Had Daniel ever had access to my online accounts? Had I signed anything recently under family pressure? Had my name appeared on any business filings I did not authorize? No, and I did not know. Dana leaned back. "My assessment is that your son and daughter-in-law represented access to your property, and your expected relocation as a form of financial backing they did not actually have. When you sold independently and secured the proceeds, the foundation under whatever commitments they had made collapsed." Arthur slid a document across the table. It was a copy of a business loan application. Daniel's name was on it, so was Melissa's. Under the section labeled Assets and Expected Capital Support, there was a line that made my stomach drop. Projected liquidity from family property transition, $800,000 plus. They had been counting my house as their money. Dana continued. "They appear to have been buying into a high-end restaurant venture through Melissa's cousin, a man named Ryan Keller. I ran a preliminary background check this morning. Keller has connections to at least 2 failed ventures and a civil complaint for investor misrepresentation. He operates through a company called Marina Crest Holdings, which is layered wired through two shell entities. The structure suggests speed and opacity, not legitimate business. Helen, who had driven out to the cottage with me, put both hands over her mouth. In plain English, she said. What does that mean? Dana folded her hands. It means Daniel and Melissa may have stepped into a deal with people who care more about money moving fast than about clean paperwork or family loyalty. And it means when their plan fell apart, they probably had no safe way to explain why. The meeting at Arthur's office happened that afternoon. Daniel and Melissa arrived looking like they had aged a decade in 48 hours. Daniel's shirt was wrinkled. Melissa's polish had cracked. Her mascara was smudged. Her hands would not stay still. For 1 second when Daniel saw me, his eyes softened, and I almost hated that more than the anger, because it reminded me how easily love confuses itself with hope. Mom, he started. Arthur raised a hand. We are here to discuss facts. Daniel's jaw hardened. Fine. Facts. You sold your house without telling me. You moved your assets without warning. You disappeared and left a dramatic note like we were criminals, Melissa added in a voice straining to stay controlled. This has created a serious personal and financial crisis. I looked at them both. Personal for whom? Financial for whom? Daniel rubbed his mouth. You don't understand everything that was in motion. Then explain it. He looked at Melissa. She looked at him. Neither wanted to say it first. So I reached into my purse, took out my phone, and pressed play. His own voice filled the room. She's a burden, Mel. She doesn't see it, but she is. We've put our lives on hold long enough. The silence that followed was worse than any scream I have ever heard. Daniel's face drained of color. Melissa looked furious. Not ashamed. Furious. I set the phone down. Now explain the context. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Arthur slid the emails across the table. Then explain these. And then Daniel broke. Not gracefully, not with dignity. He broke the way a dam breaks when too much pressure has built behind it for too long. All at once. Messy and irreversible. He admitted the restaurant deal. He admitted Ryan Keller. He admitted the bridge financing, the personal guarantees, the short-term investor commitments that were already past due. He admitted that he and Melissa had promised capital they did not have, backing they could not deliver, liquidity that existed only in a future where I had been quietly moved aside, and my house converted into their operating budget. How much? I asked. He stared at the table. Daniel, how much? $320,000. Helen gasped from the doorway. Then Melissa said the sentence that turned the room to ice. If you don't help fix this now, they are going to come after us. And from the look on her face, I knew she was not talking about a bank. That night, at a small guest suite arranged by Arthur above a chapel office on the far side of town, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. The text read, Mrs. Mitchell, this is Ryan Keller. We need to clear up a misunderstanding before other people make it unpleasant. Call me now. A second message. You should know your son tried to protect you. That option is fading. Then a third, nice church office. Quiet place. Someone knew where I was. I locked the door and backed away from the window with my hands shaking so badly I could barely forward the messages to Arthur and Dana. 10 minutes later, Arthur arrived with 2 officers from the Cedar Grove Police Department. They photographed the texts, took my statement, and confirmed that a dark SUV had been seen circling the chapel parking lot twice that evening. Dana's voice was calm, but her eyes were not. This is intimidation, and it tells us something important. They are frightened. The police moved me to a hotel that night under a different name. I lay in a bed that was not mine, in a room that smelled like industrial cleaner, and stared at the ceiling until 3 a.m. 1 month earlier, my biggest worry had been whether my rose bushes would survive a late frost. Now I was being relocated like a witness in a crime drama. Around midnight, Helen called. Daniel had shown up at her house alone, not angry, not shouting, broken. He sat in his car outside for 20 minutes with his head on the steering wheel. Before he drove away, he said one thing through the window. I didn't know it would go this far. So many tragedies begin right there. One selfish step, then another. A lie to make things easier. A second lie to protect the first. By the time you turn around, the road back does not exist anymore. 2 days later, Daniel asked for one final meeting. Not at Arthur's office. At the Cedar Grove Police Station, Conference Room B, with attorneys present. Arthur told me I did not have to go. Dana said I probably should, because if Daniel was ready to tell the whole truth, it might end this before someone got hurt. I went. He looked 20 years older. His shoulders were bent. His eyes were swollen and red. He did not look like the man who had come home from Europe, twisting my front door key with a smile. He looked like someone standing in the wreckage of choices he could no longer outrun. Melissa sat beside him with her hands shaking in her lap. Ryan was not there. That told me plenty. The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. Daniel did not hide this time. He admitted everything. The promised capital, the false representations, the plan to establish power of attorney by building a case around my supposed decline, the sticky note in Melissa's handwriting, the voicemail he had never meant to leave. He admitted it all, not with the slick confidence of a man in finance, but with the broken voice of a person who had finally run out of lies to stand on. Then he said the part that cut deepest. I need you to know something. When I said burden, I wasn't talking about taking care of you. I was talking about feeling trapped because we had built our entire financial future around money we didn't have. I was angry at myself, at the pressure, at how far in we were. But I said that word because somewhere along the way, I started seeing you as the thing standing between me and fixing my own mess. And that is the ugliest truth I have ever said out loud. I sat perfectly still. Sometimes the truth does not make you feel better. Sometimes it just removes the last lie. Melissa spoke then, and her voice cracked for the first time since I had known her. I pushed him. I kept saying your house would solve everything. I kept saying you had more than enough and we deserved a chance. I told myself we were just speeding up something that would happen eventually. But it got bigger and scarier, and I kept going because I didn't want to admit I was wrong. The police took statements. Records were copied. Dana later explained that most of the fallout would be civil and financial. Investor disputes, debt restructuring, possible fraud charges against Ryan Keller and his associates. Daniel and Melissa would face consequences of their own. There would be lawsuits, humiliation, and years of rebuilding if they were lucky. But none of that mattered to me as much as the moment that came next. When everyone else stepped out, Daniel looked at me and started crying the way he had cried as a child, without armor, without control. "Mom," he said, "I am so sorry. I wish I could tell you I rushed to hold him. I did not. Love was still there." A mother's love does not disappear just because it has been wounded, but trust was gone, and trust cannot be summoned by tears alone. So I told him the truth. "I believe you are sorry now, but you were not sorry when you were planning my future without me. You were not sorry when you called me a burden. You were not sorry when you tried to take control by making me look weak. Sorry matters, Daniel, but it does not erase what you became while chasing what you wanted." He covered his face and nodded. Then I said the hardest thing I have ever said to another human being. "I forgive you enough to let the hatred stop here, but I do not trust you enough to let life go back to what it was." That broke him, and maybe it should have, because forgiveness is not the same as restoration. Children and grown adults both need to learn that. Over the next 2 months, everything collapsed around them. Ryan Keller disappeared from the restaurant deal and resurfaced only through attorneys. The venture fell apart. Several investors turned on each other. Daniel and Melissa sold their own house at a loss to cover debts. Their Europe photos vanished from social media. The bright, polished future they had been building was made of sand, and the tide finally came in. As for me, I did not go back to the life I had before. That house was gone, and in a strange way, I was glad. It had held too much pain by the end. I bought a smaller home near the lake. 1 floor, blue shutters, a porch just wide enough for a chair, and a cup of morning tea. I furnished it slowly with the things I loved most. Frank's leather chair by the window, my mother's quilt at the foot of the bed, the photo of Daniel at age 8, fishing with his father, both of them grinning under wide summer light. Yes, even that one. Love and hurt can live in the same room. That is part of being human. Helen visits often now. We laugh more than we used to. Maybe because we learned how fast a life can turn. I joined a reading club. I planted herbs along the porch railing. I sleep better. Not perfectly, but better. Daniel wrote me letters for a long time before I agreed to see him again. Real letters. Handwritten on plain paper, not polished texts crafted to manage my reaction. In them, he admitted greed, fear, pride, and cowardice. He did not ask for money. He did not ask to be rescued. He asked only for a chance someday to prove he could become a better man than the one on that voicemail. Maybe he will. Maybe that is his work now. The last time I saw him that year, he stood on my new porch holding a paper bag of tomato plants for my little garden. He looked older, humbler, smaller somehow, not because life had crushed him, but because truth had. He glanced at the blue shutters, the porch swing, the flower pots along the railing, then back at me. "This place suits you," he said softly. I nodded. "Yes, it does." He swallowed. "Are you happy here?" I looked past him at the lake glimmering through the trees and thought about the woman I had been before the voicemail. The woman who kept peace by shrinking herself. The woman who believed endurance alone was virtue. I had loved deeply then, but I had not protected myself. I looked at my son and told him the truth. "I am not the woman you thought you could move like furniture, Daniel. I never was. I was just quiet long enough for you to forget that." He stood there for a long moment, holding those tomato plants, and said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Some lessons only land when they cost you everything, and some mothers only find their voice after the house is empty, the locks are changed, and the silence finally belongs to them.